The Mafia boss ordered the poor maid out in the rain. But his baby crawled after her the night Roman Virelli ordered the maid into the storm. He believed he was protecting his empire, not destroying his bloodline. Chicago had long ago learned to lower its voice when Roman Virelli's name was spoken. His influence stretched from high-rise boardrooms to private clubs where agreements were sealed without paperwork and loyalty was measured in silence. He was not a man driven by impulse. He was disciplined, strategic, emotionally contained. Those who worked for him understood that his calm demeanor was not kindness, it was control. Roman believed that emotion clouded judgment, and judgment was the only thing separating power from collapse. The Virelli estate stood beyond the noise of downtown, guarded by iron gates and a reputation that kept most threats at a distance. Inside, every detail reflected Roman's philosophy. The marble floors shined without flaw. The staff moved with quiet precision. Schedules were honored down to the minute. Information traveled upward, never sideways. Roman ruled his world the way an architect designs a structure, with symmetry, foresight, and no tolerance for cracks. But cracks had begun to form. A financial discrepancy had surfaced within one of his import channels. A private meeting detail had somehow reached an outside competitor. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to signal weakness. Roman understood that empires rarely fall from explosions. They erode from within. The idea that someone inside his household might be leaking information unsettled him more than any rival ever could. Victor Hale, his long-trusted operations advisor, had planted the seed carefully. He suggested that domestic staff were often overlooked as potential vulnerabilities, that kindness could be manipulated, that proximity to power created temptation. He never named Elena directly, but the implication hung in the air like humidity before a storm. Elena Hayes had been part of the household for nearly a year. After Roman's wife passed away from a prolonged illness, the estate had felt colder despite the staff's efficiency. Elena arrived quietly, hired through a discreet agency. She carried herself with humility shaped by hardship. She did not intrude, did not gossip, did not ask unnecessary questions. She worked long hours without complaint, and maintained a composure that drew little attention. Yet there was one undeniable truth inside those walls. Noah Virelli responded to her differently. Roman's infant son had struggled since his mother's passing. He resisted new caretakers cried through the night, and seemed restless in rooms filled with expensive comfort. Roman provided everything materially possible, yet the child's eyes often searched for something intangible. When Elena held him, however, the tension in his tiny frame eased. She seemed to understand his rhythms. She hummed softly without performance. She carried him as if she had known him longer than months. Roman noticed. He did not comment on it, but he noticed. At first, he interpreted the attachment as convenience. Then he began to see it as dependency. And dependency, in Roman's world, was dangerous. When Victor's suspicions aligned with that emotional vulnerability, the equation felt simple. If there was even a possibility that information flowed through Elena, intentionally or not, then removing her was not cruelty. It was protection. The storm arrived just after sunset, rolling across the skyline with heavy thunder and sheets of relentless rain. Inside the estate, Roman summoned the household staff to the main hall. His presence alone silenced speculation. He stood at the base of the staircase, posture straight, expression unreadable. He spoke evenly. Information had been compromised. Trust was under review. Until clarity was restored, certain individuals would be dismissed from the premises. When he said Elena's name, the room seemed to shrink. She stood near the staircase, holding Noah against her shoulder. The baby's small fingers clutched the fabric of her blouse as if sensing tension. Elena did not argue. She did not plead. Her eyes briefly met Roman's. Searching for hesitation, she found none. Roman believed he was acting in the interest of stability. Authority demanded decisiveness. Investigation created vulnerability. Mercy created loopholes. In his mind, he was reinforcing discipline. The front doors opened and wind tore through the foyer. Rain lashed against the marble like a warning from the sky itself. Elena gently transferred Noah into the nurse's arms. The child resisted, a small whimper escaping his lips. She pressed a soft kiss to his forehead, not as defiance, but as farewell. Then she stepped into the storm. The rain soaked her within seconds, flattening her hair against her face as she walked down the long driveway. She did not look back. Dignity was the only possession she refused to surrender. Inside, the staff remained frozen. Some avoided Roman's gaze. Others focused on the floor. Roman turned away first. already compartmentalizing the moment as necessary. Protection required sacrifice. Empires were not built on sentiment. But before the doors could fully close, a small sound echoed across the hall. A trembling cry. Noah twisted violently in the nurse's grip, his face red with urgency. Then, with surprising strength, he slipped free. His small hands hit the marble floor with a soft slap as he began crawling toward the open doorway. His movements were unsteady but determined, fueled by instinct, stronger than fear. Staff members hesitated, unsure whether to intervene without instruction. Noah crawled faster, tiny palms sliding against the polished surface. Eyes fixed on the fad, engage not look toward his father. He did not look toward his father. He did not seek reassurance from authority, his entire being strained toward the woman who had just been cast out. Roman heard the commotion but did not immediately turn. He did not see his son cross the invisible boundary of obedience. He did not see the silent rejection unfolding behind him, and as thunder shook the state and rain swallowed Elena's figure beyond the gates, something irreversible shifted inside those marble walls. Roman Virelli would soon realize that the greatest threat to his empire was not betrayal from within, but the moment his own son chose love over power. The most feared man in Chicago froze, not because of bullets, but because of his son's trembling hands against cold stone. The sound was small, almost fragile, yet it sliced through the marble silence of the Virelli estate with more force than any raised voice ever could. Noah's palms struck the cold floor as he pushed himself forward, his breathing uneven, his tiny fingers slipping against polished stone that reflected the storm's flashing light. The doors were still open. Rain drifted inward in faint mist, and beyond that threshold, Elena Hayes was walking away without looking back. No one moved. The staff had been trained by years of unspoken rules. They responded to commands, not emotions. Roman Virelli had built his authority on certainty, and certainty left no room for improvisation. So when the baby slipped from the nurse's arms and began crawling toward the storm, they hesitated not out of indifference, but out of instinct. No one interfered without Roman's direction. No one acted before he did. Noah's small cries grew louder, layered with confusion and urgency. He did not understand betrayal or suspicion or empire. He understood absence. He understood that the arms that steadied him were now vanishing into cold rain. His crawl was not rebellion, it was instinct. Roman finally turned. For a fraction of a second, he did not comprehend what he was seeing. His son, heir to everything he had built, was moving away from him, not toward the comfort of the staff, not reaching for his father's protection. He was crawling toward the open doors, toward the woman Roman had just dismissed as a potential threat. The image unsettled him in a way no accusation ever had. He stepped forward, his polished shoes echoing across the hall. The storm outside intensified, thunder rolling across the skyline, like a warning no one had asked for. Noah's hands trembled against the floor as he neared the doorway. Wind lifted the edge of the carpet near the entrance, brushing against his fragile fingers. "Stop him," one of the staff whispered under her breath. But no one acted. Roman reached down and lifted Noah firmly into his arms. The child's body twisted instantly, small fists pushing against his father's chest with surprising determination. A cry escaped him, high, desperate, wounded. He reached past Roman's shoulder toward the rain. Roman tightened his grip, not roughly, but with control. He felt the resistance, he felt the rejection. Inside his chest, something unfamiliar stirred. It was not anger in its usual form, it was sharper, more personal. His son was not merely upset, he was choosing. The symbolism struck harder than Roman was prepared to admit. In front of his staff in his own home, the most vulnerable member of his family had expressed preference. And it was not for him. His jaw tightened. He told himself it was temporary. Children attach easily. Comfort follows routine. Elena had spent more hours in proximity. It was practical, nothing more. But memory intruded despite his discipline. He recalled passing by the nursery late at night and hearing Elena's low humming when Noah refused to sleep. He remembered glimpsing her pacing slowly near the window, whispering reassurances that Roman never stayed long enough to hear. He had convinced himself that providing security and wealth was enough. That emotional presence was secondary. That discipline built resilience. Yet in that moment, as Noah strained toward the doorway, Roman saw a truth he had avoided. Attachment cannot be commanded. Noah's cries grew louder, his body arching backward in protest. The nurse stepped forward tentatively, but Roman shook his head. He would not relinquish control, not in front of witnesses. not in a moment that already felt like exposure. Outside, Elena had reached the edge of the driveway. Rain soaked her clothing, pressing fabric against skin, erasing the outline of the composed woman she had tried to remain. She did not run. She believed her departure was final. Roman felt the eyes of his staff on him. Authority thrives on perception. If he reversed his decision too quickly, it would suggest doubt. Doubt invited instability. But Noah's sobbing did not stop. Each strained breath seemed to echo off the high ceilings. Each small reach of his hand felt like a silent accusation. Roman exhaled slowly, recalculating. He issued a single instruction: bring her back inside. The command was sharp, clipped, devoid of apology. 2 staff members rushed toward the entrance, stepping into the rain to intercept Elena before she reached the gate. Roman did not frame the order as reconsideration. He framed it as procedural review. The household would remain secure until verification was complete. He told himself this was not compassion, it was containment. Minutes later, Elena was escorted back through the doors, water trailing behind her across the marble. Her face remained composed, but exhaustion lingered in her eyes. She did not thank him. She did not protest. She simply stepped back into the space she had just been expelled from. The moment Noah saw her, his cries fractured into softer sounds. His body leaned forward again, arms stretching with desperate certainty. Roman hesitated before allowing the nurse to take him. The instant Elena held him, his trembling subsided. His breathing slowed against her shoulder, as if the storm had existed only outside her reach. The hall grew uncomfortably quiet. Roman observed the transformation with a stillness that masked turmoil. His son's calm was immediate, undeniable. It was not performance, it was trust. Something inside Roman shifted, subtle but irreversible. He had expected loyalty from employees. He had demanded obedience from rivals, but he had never considered that love could operate outside hierarchy. Victor Hale stepped forward quietly, reminding Roman that caution remained necessary. That proximity did not equal innocence. That emotional displays could be manipulated. Roman nodded, but the conviction behind the gesture was thinner than before. As Elena carried Noah upstairs to dry him and change his clothes, Roman remained in the foyer, listening to the fading sound of the child's breathing. For the first time, doubt entered not about betrayal, but about himself. He had built a world where authority answered every question. Yet his son had introduced one that power could not silence. Why did safety exist in Elena's arms and not in his? Why did the child reach for warmth instead of wealth? The storm outside continued, but the greater disturbance had already taken root within the estate walls. Roman Virelli had always believed that control preserved legacy, but as he stood alone beneath the chandelier's cold light, he began to understand that legacy might require something he had never learned to give. That night, Roman Virelli did not question Elena's loyalty as much as he questioned way. His own son felt safer in her arms than in his, and the answer threatened everything he thought made him powerful. Elena Hayes did not fear Roman Virelli. She feared what would happen if he ever learned the truth. The storm had passed by morning, but inside the estate, tension lingered like humidity trapped behind glass. Elena moved quietly through the halls, her expression composed, her posture steady, as if the events of the previous night had never happened. To the staff she appeared grateful to still have her position. To Roman she appeared contained. But beneath that calm exterior lived a history that could fracture everything he believed about loyalty. Years before she ever stepped foot inside the Virelli estate, Elena Hayes had been Elena Morales, wife to Daniel Morales, a logistics coordinator who worked within the outer layers of Roman's organization. Daniel had not been powerful, nor reckless. He had been ambitious in the cautious way of a man who believed steady loyalty would secure a stable future. He handled schedules, transportation routes, vendor contracts. He believed proximity to power meant protection. He was wrong. A financial irregularity had surfaced within the network, and someone needed to be made responsible. An internal disciplinary review was conducted quietly, efficiently, without headlines. Daniel's name surfaced in documents he had never seen before. By the time Elena understood what was happening, decisions had already been finalized. She was told her husband had violated protocol. She was told the matter had been resolved. She was never told the full truth. What she did know was this: Daniel had tried to warn someone before his removal. He had mentioned unusual transfers, unexplained adjustments in internal ledgers. He had been nervous in a way she had never seen, and then he was gone, not through public scandal or visible force, but erased through organizational correction. Roman Virelli never reviewed Daniel's case personally. The matter had been handled by his underboss at the time, Victor Dane. Roman trusted delegation. He trusted reports. He trusted that discipline, when executed, was necessary. Elena did not seek revenge. Grief reshaped her differently. With bills mounting and no family left to lean on, survival became her only objective. She changed her last name, moved neighborhoods, and avoided anything connected to the organization that had quietly swallowed her husband, until she learned that Roman's wife had fallen ill. When the estate began searching for discreet household staff, Elena made a decision that even she did not fully understand at the time. She applied, not out of vengeance but out of something more complex. She needed stability, and a part of her needed to see the man whose empire had indirectly cost her everything. Roman never recognized her. To him, she was simply another employee processed through an agency. He did not remember the names buried in older files. He did not connect the quiet maid to a minor logistics associate removed years earlier. Elena, however, remembered everything. She noticed inconsistencies almost immediately upon joining the household. Financial discussions that did not align with documented transfers. Subtle tensions between Victor Dane and other managers. Conversations cut short when she entered rooms. She did not seek this information. It surfaced naturally in a house where walls carried echoes. Over time, patterns emerged. Victor Dane had grown more powerful since Daniel's dismissal. His authority expanded quietly, and so did his influence over budget allocations. Elena recognized certain vendor names from Daniel's old notes. She recognized numbers that did not add up. The same irregularities her husband had once mentioned seemed to continue. But Elena remained silent. She understood the difference between knowing and surviving. Her priority was not exposure. It was endurance. Then Noah was born. When Roman's wife passed away months later, grief hollowed the estate. Roman retreated further into control, burying emotion beneath schedules and strategic meetings. Staff rotated frequently, unable to meet the emotional needs of an infant who sensed absence more than words. Elena did not plan to become Noah's anchor. It happened gradually. She would step in when nurses felt overwhelmed. She would remain present when others clocked out. She held him not as an employee fulfilling duty, but as someone who understood what it meant to lose stability overnight. What Roman never saw were the small moments of protection Elena quietly provided. When unfamiliar contractors entered the estate, she kept Noah at a distance. When Victor visited unexpectedly, she ensured the nursery doors remained locked. She paid attention to details that others dismissed. She had never betrayed Roman. If anything, she had shielded his son from environments she did not fully trust. Victor Dane, however, had begun to notice her awareness. He observed the way her eyes lingered during meetings, the way she avoided him with controlled precision, the way certain documents seemed to disappear from common areas after she had cleaned. He suspected she knew more than she should, and when the latest financial discrepancies threatened to surface publicly, Victor needed insulation. Planting suspicion was easier than eliminating it. He subtly suggested to Roman that domestic staff could be manipulated by rivals. He referenced proximity and vulnerability. He never directly accused Elena, but he ensured her name hovered near doubt. When Roman acted swiftly, Victor considered the matter contained. But Elena was not naive. The night she was ordered into the storm confirmed what she had long suspected. Someone powerful wanted her gone before she spoke. When she returned to the estate after Noah's desperate crawl forced Roman's reversal, she understood that time was shrinking. Later that evening, while organizing archived files in the study at Roman's request, she discovered something that tightened her pulse. A misfiled ledger, an older transaction report bearing Daniel's signature, digitally replicated on a date after his dismissal. Attached were approval codes linked directly to Victor Dane's authorization. The implication was clear. He had been convenient. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she slid the document back into place. The truth she carried was no longer emotional. It was tangible. If Roman ever saw that ledger, his trust in Victor would fracture. If Victor realized she had seen it, her position in the estate would become far more dangerous. She had entered the household seeking survival. She now held evidence that could ignite justice or destroy her. Upstairs, Noah stirred in his sleep. Elena paused outside his nursery, listening to his soft breathing. She understood that exposing Victor would not simply shift internal power. It would destabilize the entire structure surrounding the child she had grown to love, like her own. And as she returned to her quarters, her mind raced with a realization more chilling than betrayal. Victor Dane was not merely protecting himself, he was preparing for something larger, something strategic, calculated, and irreversible. When Elena uncovered a hidden transfer plan tied to Victor's offshore accounts, she realized the next move would not target Roman's empire. It would place his son at the center of a scheme far more dangerous than betrayal. Roman Virelli controlled judges, senators, and streets, but he could not control the silence in his own streets. Hild's eyes. The estate had returned to its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. Meetings resumed. Accounts were reviewed. Security briefings filled Roman Virelli's mornings with the precision he trusted. Yet beneath the order he curated so carefully, something unsettled lingered. It followed him into his office, into his car, into the quiet moments when the house grew still at night. Since his wife's passing, Roman had convinced himself that efficiency was the most reliable form of stability. Grief, he believed, could be compartmentalized. Pain could be managed through productivity. He expanded contracts, tightened protocols, eliminated weak links. If he strengthened the empire, then nothing personal would ever destabilize him again. But fatherhood did not respond to strategy. He remembered the last conversation he had with his wife Adriana in the hospital room where machines measured time more accurately than hope. She had held his hand with a fragility that unsettled him more than any adversary ever had. She had asked him not to let their son grow up surrounded by fear disguised as respect. She had asked him to soften, to show Noah a different version of power. Roman had nodded then, promising change in the abstract way. Men promise what they do not yet understand. After she was gone, he defaulted to what he knew control. Noah's nursery was filled with the finest materials. Private tutors were pre-screened before the child could even speak. Security cameras monitored every hallway. Roman provided everything tangible. Yet when he stood in the doorway watching his son sit quietly in Elena's lap, he sensed a distance no money could bridge. Noah did not recoil from him. He simply did not reach. The difference was subtle but sharp. The child's eyes brightened when Elena entered a room. His breathing slowed when she carried him. With Roman there was recognition, but not instinctive trust. It was as if the boy sensed the armor his father never removed. Roman told himself it was temporary. Children gravitated toward warmth. Elena offered warmth because she had no authority to project, but the longer he observed, the more the attachment unsettled him. It was not romantic jealousy. It was displacement. One evening, Roman stood outside the nursery longer than he intended. Through the partially open door, he watched Elena rock Noah gently near the window. She was humming again, that same low melody that seemed to exist beyond language. Noah's small hand rested against her collarbone as if anchoring himself to something steady. Roman remembered Adriana humming the same way. The realization tightened something in his chest. He stepped back before either of them noticed him. Vulnerability, he reminded himself, was a weakness competitors exploited. Emotional dependency created leverage. He could not afford leverage within his own home. Victor Dane understood this instinct well. In private meetings, Victor subtly reinforced Roman's unease. He presented updated financial summaries, pointing to discrepancies that still lacked explanation. He mentioned Elena's unusual access to private areas of the estate. He framed his concerns as loyalty to Roman's legacy. He spoke about how emotional blind spots often become strategic vulnerabilities. Roman listened carefully. The ledger Elena had discovered remained hidden in the study archives, unnoticed by him. Instead, the reports Victor curated shaped his perception. Transfers miscategorized, vendor payments delayed. Each irregularity was accompanied by an implication rather than proof. Attachment clouds assessment, Victor remarked one afternoon, careful to maintain a respectful tone, especially when it involves family. Roman did not respond immediately, but the words lingered. That night, he reviewed internal communications again. He examined staff access logs. Elena's presence appeared in multiple operational zones. Not suspicious on their own, but frequent. She was trusted by security because she cared for Noah. That trust, Victor implied, could be misused. Roman felt the conflict intensify within him. On one side stood instinct, the image of his son reaching for Elena, calming instantly in her arms. On the other stood logic, the possibility that proximity to his child created opportunity for influence. He had built his empire by choosing logic. When he entered the nursery later that evening, Noah was awake, sitting quietly on the floor surrounded by wooden blocks. Elena stood nearby, folding small clothes with quiet focus. The child looked up at Roman but did not crawl toward him. Instead, His gaze drifted briefly back to Elena, as if confirming her continued presence. Roman felt the sting more deeply this time. He knelt beside his son, attempting to engage him with gentle gestures that felt unfamiliar. Noah allowed the interaction but remained distant. After a moment, he reached his arms toward Elena, without hesitation. Roman stood slowly. In that simple movement, he felt the widening gap between authority and affection. Power could command obedience. It could not manufacture trust. Later that night, Roman made a decision he framed as precaution rather than emotion. He instructed security to begin a formal review of Elena's activities. Access permissions would be restricted. Her movements would be monitored discreetly. If evidence surfaced, she would be removed permanently. This time, there would be no reversal. Victor approved the measures with subtle satisfaction. The narrative was aligning exactly as he intended. Yet Roman did not feel relief. He felt something closer to loss, though he refused to name it. As he prepared to finalize Elena's dismissal paperwork the following morning, thunder cracked unexpectedly across the sky. The sound was followed not by rain, but by a sharp disturbance near the estate gates. Security alarms flickered briefly before stabilizing. Staff members rushed to windows, tension rippling through the house. Roman's instincts shifted instantly from emotional conflict to operational readiness. He moved toward the security monitors, scanning the perimeter feed. Outside the gates, confusion unfolded. Vehicles halted, guards signaling urgently, communication lines buzzing with urgency. Inside the nursery, Noah began to cry. Startled by the sudden noise, Elena instinctively lifted him, shielding his head against her shoulder. Roman stared at the screen, jaw tightening. The timing was not coincidence. Just as he had resolved to sever Elena's place in his household, instability arrived at his door. Before Roman could exile Elena for good, the chaos at his gates forced him to confront a far more dangerous truth. Someone was testing his power, and the target might not be his empire, but his son. The real enemy had never stood outside Roman's gates. He had been seated at his table. The disturbance at the estate gates did not explode into chaos, but it carried enough intention to rattle the illusion of control Roman Virelli had spent years perfecting. Security footage revealed 2 unmarked vehicles blocking the private road leading toward the property. Their engines idled. Their presence was deliberate. No one exited. No demands were made. It was not an attack in the traditional sense. It was a message. Inside the estate, alarms had activated briefly before backup systems stabilized the perimeter. Roman watched the monitors with a calm that was practiced, not natural. His mind moved quickly through probabilities. Rival intimidation, financial retaliation, political pressure. But something about the timing unsettled him more than the vehicles themselves. The incident occurred just hours after he initiated internal restrictions targeting Elena Hayes. Coincidence was rarely random in Roman's world. Staff members moved quietly but urgently. Noah's cry from upstairs cut through the controlled environment like a reminder of what truly stood at stake. Elena, holding the child close, stepped into the hallway as security personnel coordinated responses through encrypted channels. Her arms tightened instinctively around Noah, her body positioning itself between him and the noise as if shielding him from something she could not yet see. Roman noticed that instinct immediately. She did not ask for instructions. She did not seek permission. She acted. When security confirmed, the vehicles eventually retreated without escalation. The estate settled into a tense silence. The threat had not materialized into physical harm, yet its implication was unmistakable. Someone had tested the perimeter. Someone had measured response time. Someone had wanted Roman unsettled. Victor Dane entered the control room moments later, his expression carrying a carefully calibrated concern. He suggested that rival factions were likely probing weaknesses after recent financial disruptions. He recommended tightening inner circles, reducing staff access, eliminating potential internal leaks swiftly before outside pressure increased. The narrative was convenient. Roman listened but did not immediately respond. His gaze shifted back to the screen replaying the vehicle's approach. Something about the route felt calculated, too precise, too informed. Later that evening, Roman requested a detailed report on internal communication patterns preceding the incident. He did not announce his suspicion, he simply asked for raw data. As technicians compiled access logs and transfer histories, fragments began surfacing that did not align with Victor's earlier explanations. Transaction codes redirected through shell vendors. Approval timestamps altered subtly. Digital signatures replicated. One signature in particular caught Roman's attention. Daniel Morales. The name meant little at first. It belonged to an associate dismissed years ago during a disciplinary review overseen by Victor. Roman remembered approving the recommendation without scrutiny. Delegation required trust. Trust required hierarchy. But as Roman examined archived files more closely, inconsistencies multiplied. Daniel's dismissal had been linked to financial discrepancies, remarkably similar to those currently under review. Vendor accounts listed then matched entities connected to Victor's expanding authority now. Roman felt a slow tightening in his chest. The pattern was not new, it was recurring. Upstairs, Elena sat beside Noah's crib, soothing him back into sleep after the earlier alarm. She sensed the shift in the household atmosphere. She knew Victor's influence ran deep. She also knew the ledgers she had discovered linked Daniel's name to falsified transfers authorized by Victor himself. She had remained silent to protect Noah from instability, but instability had arrived regardless. Roman requested a private meeting with Victor the following morning. The conversation remained controlled, measured, absent of overt accusation. Roman asked for clarification regarding historical vendor allocations. Victor responded smoothly, attributing inconsistencies to clerical error and procedural evolution over time. But Roman watched closely. He noticed the brief hesitation before certain answers, the slight recalibration in tone. For the first time in years, Roman felt uncertainty, not about an external rival, but about the man who had stood beside him through every expansion. The internal war began quietly. On one side stood ego, the unwillingness to admit he had trusted incorrectly. On the other stood truth, the mounting evidence that his delegation had shielded manipulation. That evening, Roman accessed restricted archives personally, rather than through assistants. He compared digital trails across years of transactions. The pattern was undeniable. Funds skimmed gradually. Blame redirected strategically. Associates removed when they noticed irregularities. Daniel Morales had not been guilty. He had been inconvenient. Roman's mind replayed the image of Elena standing in the rain, accused without proof. He remembered Noah crawling across the marble floor in defiance of authority. The symbolism no longer felt emotional. It felt diagnostic. Victor had framed her. It settled like ice. Roman now understood the earlier disturbance at the gates differently. It was not rival aggression. It was manufactured instability. A controlled test designed to justify tighter internal consolidation. If Roman appeared emotionally distracted, conflicted over Elena, unsettled by fatherhood, Victor could position himself as the stabilizing force. A coup did not require weapons. It required perception. Meanwhile, Elena sensed increasing surveillance around her movements. Access permissions narrowed subtly. Security staff observed her longer than before. She understood that Victor would not allow loose ends once suspicion shifted. When Roman summoned her privately that evening, the air between them carried unspoken weight. He did not accuse her. Instead, he asked about Daniel Morales. Elena's breath stilled. She had prepared for many confrontations, but not this one. Roman watched her reaction carefully. There was no guilt in her eyes, only pain long carried. As she spoke, carefully and without dramatics, she explained her husband's dismissal, the unexplained irregularities, the silence that followed. She did not accuse Roman directly. She simply described the pattern. Roman listened without interruption. For the first time, he saw collateral damage not as abstraction, but as consequence. Victor had orchestrated Daniel's removal. Victor had redirected blame. Victor had framed Elena to eliminate a witness who unknowingly carried threads of truth. And somewhere beyond financial greed, a larger plan unfolded. If Victor could isolate Roman emotionally and consolidate financial control simultaneously, leadership transition could occur quietly, under the guise of necessity. Roman stood alone in his office, late that night, reviewing the evidence one final time. The numbers did not lie. The digital trails aligned too precisely to dismiss. He had been protecting the wrong vulnerability. The betrayal was not outside his gates. It had been seated at his table for years. As Roman uncovered archived authorization codes bearing Victor's signature on the order that removed Daniel Morales years ago, he realized the truth was darker than financial fraud. Victor had orchestrated Elena's husband's downfall without his authorization, and that revelation would change everything. For the first time in decades, Roman Virelli felt something heavier than power, remorse. The evidence did not shout. It did not accuse. It was spectacle. It sat quietly in Roman Virelli's private office, glowing from the screen in neat rows of numbers and authorization codes. Years of delegated trust reduced to patterns of manipulation. Victor Dane had not merely skimmed funds, he had redirected blame, removed obstacles, and shaped internal narratives to his advantage. And in doing so, he had altered the course of lives Roman had never paused to examine. Elena Hayes stood across from him that evening, composed but guarded. There was no anger in her posture, no dramatic confrontation, only a steady exhaustion that comes from carrying truth too long without acknowledgement. He asked directly about Daniel Morales. He asked what she believed had truly happened, and Elena's voice remained calm as she described the weeks before her husband's dismissal, the late-night tension, the files Daniel had reviewed, the unease he could not explain but could not ignore. She told Roman how Daniel had insisted that numbers were being adjusted above his level of access, that approvals were appearing under his name without his input. She explained that he had requested a private review, one that never materialized. She never accused Roman personally. She did not need to. The implication hung between them. Victor had orchestrated the removal of a man who noticed too much, and Roman had signed the final authorization without question. "I never wanted revenge," Elena said quietly, her eyes steady. "I wanted stability. I wanted to survive, and I wanted my husband's name to mean something more than a footnote." Roman absorbed the words without defense. For years, he had believed that efficiency justified harshness, that discipline prevented chaos. But now he saw the flaw in that logic. Delegation without oversight had created a system where ambition could disguise itself as loyalty. The corruption was not external. It had grown within the structure he built. In that moment, Roman recognized a painful symmetry. He had been emotionally absent from his son in the same way he had been emotionally absent from certain decisions. He provided structure but not presence, authority but not scrutiny, and both absences had consequences. Upstairs, Noah's cough echoed faintly through the hallway. The child had developed a fever after the stress of the recent disturbances. Doctors attributed it to exhaustion and environmental tension. Infants absorb instability in ways adults underestimate. Elena remained by his side, pressing cool cloths against his forehead, whispering reassurance that required no translation. Roman stood in the doorway of the nursery longer than usual. He watched the quiet intimacy between caregiver and child. Noah stirred weakly, reaching instinctively toward Elena's hand. Roman felt a familiar ache, but this time it was not jealousy. It was recognition. He had mistaken control for protection. When the pediatrician recommended overnight observation at a private hospital as a precaution, Roman insisted on accompanying them personally. It was the first time he had remained at his son's bedside through an entire night without delegation. The hospital room was dim, machines humming softly in controlled rhythm. Outside the window, Chicago's skyline glowed indifferent to personal reckoning. Elena sat in a chair near the bed, exhaustion lining her features. Roman remained standing at first, uncomfortable in stillness. But as hours passed and Noah's fever fluctuated, Roman's posture softened. He sat. He leaned forward. He adjusted blankets himself. He listened to each breath with an attention he had previously reserved for financial reports. Around 3 a.m, when the room was quiet except for steady monitoring sounds, Roman spoke, not as a boss, not as an authority, but as a father uncertain of his own reflection. "I should have looked closer," he said, not expecting forgiveness. Elena did not respond with absolution. She simply nodded once. Looking closer now is what matters. The simplicity of her answer unsettled him more than accusation would have. By dawn, Noah's fever began to subside. Relief settled gradually, cautious but real. Roman felt something unfamiliar rising within him, a fragile resolve to correct what had been overlooked. Back at the estate later that day, Roman initiated changes without public announcement. He reassigned financial oversight to independent auditors unaffiliated with Victor. He restricted Victor's access to certain accounts under the guise of procedural modernization. He began reviewing internal leadership structures personally rather than through filtered summaries. Each move was subtle, calculated, strategic, but beneath the strategy was something new: accountability. Roman understood that dismantling Victor's network required patience. Direct confrontation would trigger defensive escalation. Victor had spent years consolidating quiet influence. Removing him would not be immediate. Meanwhile, Elena noticed the shift. Security protocols changed. Certain staff members loyal to Victor were transferred quietly. The atmosphere within the estate recalibrated. Yet she also sensed danger in transition. Victor Dane was perceptive. He would notice restrictions. He would detect shifts in reporting lines. He would understand that Roman's trust had cracked. One evening, as Roman reviewed updated transaction logs confirming additional discrepancies tied to Victor's shell entities, a notification appeared indicating that someone had accessed archived files regarding Daniel Morales. The access request originated from Victor's credentials. Roman's expression hardened. Victor was no longer merely consolidating influence. He was tracing threats. Elsewhere in the estate, Victor reviewed his own internal alerts. Financial channels he once controlled seamlessly now required secondary approvals. Meetings he previously attended, thematically, were rescheduled without him. Patterns he had perfected for years were shifting. Victor did not react publicly. He recalculated. If Roman suspected the truth, hesitation would not serve him. Emotional instability within leadership created opportunity, but it also created risk. Victor had invested too much time to allow a slow unraveling. In the nursery that night, Noah slept peacefully for the first time in days. Roman stood beside the crib, watching his son's steady breathing. The weight inside him had not disappeared. It had transformed. Remorse was no longer paralyzing. It was instructive. He turned toward the window, unaware that somewhere else in the estate, Victor was finalizing contingency plans. When Victor realized Roman had uncovered the truth about Daniel Morales and the financial web beneath him, he made a decision that would force the next move, and this time, he intended to strike before Roman could fully dismantle him. Redemption does not arrive gently. It demands sacrifice, truth, and the courage to choose love over legacy. The message did not come through official channels. It came as a disruption, an absence where certainty should have been. Noah was not in his nursery at the scheduled hour. The security rotation had been reassigned minutes earlier, under Victor Dane's authority, masked as a procedural adjustment. By the time the oversight was discovered, the estate was no longer stable. It was vulnerable. Roman Virelli stood in the center of his command room as information poured in from multiple directions. Vehicles had exited through a service gate cleared under Victor's credentials. Surveillance footage from that corridor had been looped for 12 minutes. 12 minutes was more than enough time for a plan years in preparation. This was not an act of rage. It was leverage. Victor had not harmed the child. He did not need to. The message he delivered to Roman's encrypted line was precise. Withdraw the pending financial audits. Restore full operational authority and cease all internal investigations, or the child would remain out of reach. Roman felt the room narrow around him. For years he had anticipated external threats, rival factions, political entanglements, economic pressure, but he had underestimated the quiet ambition seated beside him. Victor had studied his habits, his weaknesses, his pride, and now he had targeted the one variable Roman had never protected correctly. Elena entered the command room without waiting for permission. She had already sensed something irreversible in the atmosphere. When she learned Noah was missing, her composure fractured only briefly before settling into fierce clarity. "We don't escalate," she said firmly. "He wants you reactive." Roman's instinct had been to mobilize every loyal asset at his disposal, to surround the city with pressure, to demonstrate that crossing him carried consequences. But Elena's words pierced through that reflex. Escalation would validate Victor's narrative that Roman's instability endangered the empire. It would justify a leadership shift under the guise of necessity. Victor had designed the situation carefully. He was not merely testing power, he was forcing a choice. Roman issued limited directives: no full-scale mobilization, no visible retaliation. Instead, he requested a direct meeting location from Victor. The response came quickly: a privately owned warehouse near the river, one of Victor's lesser-known operational properties. "Elena stays here," Roman ordered. She shook her head. "Noah trusts me. If he's frightened, he'll respond to me before he responds to you." Roman hesitated. The truth in her words was not an insult. It was reality. Against the council of senior advisors, Roman chose not to bring a full security convoy, selected only 2 drivers to transport them discreetly. The decision rippled through the organization like quiet shockwaves. A leader who did not assert overwhelming force risked appearing weak. But Roman understood something now that he had ignored for years. Dominance does not equal protection. Inside the warehouse, the air felt cold and unfinished. Victor stood near a stack of crates, posture composed, expression almost disappointed. Noah sat nearby in a secured playpen, unharmed but visibly unsettled. The child's eyes widened when he saw Elena, and his small hands immediately reached toward her. Victor observed the interaction with calculated detachment. "You see," he said evenly, "this is what instability looks like: attachment, emotional decision-making. It makes you vulnerable." Roman stepped forward slowly. "You manipulated my trust." Victor did not deny it. He outlined years of calculated positioning, how Daniel Morales had begun tracing financial inconsistencies, how removing him had preserved operational efficiency, how Elena's employment at the estate presented a liability, how Roman's grief after Adriana's death created an opening for strategic consolidation. "I didn't betray you," Victor said. "I optimized you." Roman felt anger rise, but it no longer controlled him. Instead, clarity replaced it. Victor had built a structure within the structure, one that prioritized ambition over loyalty, control over conscience, and Roman had allowed it through inattention. Elena moved carefully toward Noah, lifting him into her arms. The child clung to her, trembling but safe. Roman watched that instinctive trust again, and this time he did not feel displaced. He felt responsible. "You think stepping back makes you righteous," Victor continued. "The board will question you. The partners will question you. They already sense change." Roman understood the implication. Exposing Victor's actions publicly would destabilize internal confidence. Investors would retreat. Political alliances would recalibrate. The empire he had built might fracture under transparency, but shielding corruption would fracture something far greater. Roman removed a folder from his coat, copies of the financial trails, authorization codes, and falsified transfers. Evidence of systemic manipulation. He placed it on a crate between them. "It ends here," he said calmly. Victor's composure flickered for the first time. "If you expose this, you weaken yourself." Roman glanced at Noah, now resting quietly against Elena's shoulder. "Then I weaken myself." In that decision, the axis shifted. Roman contacted his legal and financial oversight teams immediately, authorizing a full internal disclosure to senior partners before rumors could distort narrative. He transferred temporary authority to an independent advisory council pending restructuring. He removed Victor from all operational control, effective immediately. There was no physical confrontation, no spectacle, only decisive accountability. Victor attempted to negotiate, to remind Roman of shared history and strategic victories. But Roman no longer measured leadership solely by expansion. He measured it by integrity. As security escorted Victor away, not violently, but formally, Roman felt the weight of consequence settle in. News of internal restructuring spread quickly. Markets reacted cautiously. Associates whispered about vulnerability. The perception of invincibility had cracked. Roman's empire stood at a crossroads. Outside the warehouse, the river reflected city lights that shimmered uncertainly in the wind. Elena adjusted Noah's blanket as they walked toward the car. Roman paused briefly, looking back at the building that symbolized both betrayal and clarity. He had saved High, son, but the cost was unfolding. As Roman walked away from the warehouse holding his child for the first time without hesitation, he understood that choosing love over power might protect his family, but it could also cost him the throne he had spent his life building. The most powerful decision Roman Virelli ever made was not who to eliminate, but what to become. Power had always come easily to Roman Virelli. It responded to calculation, to patience, to controlled risk, but transformation demanded something different. It required surrendering the illusion that dominance equaled permanence. In the weeks following Victor Dane's removal, Roman did not move with fury or spectacle. He moved with deliberate restraint. The restructuring began quietly. Financial audits were expanded beyond compliance and into transparency. Questionable partnerships were dissolved without public scandal. Expansion projects that once prioritized territorial leverage were paused indefinitely. Roman redirected capital toward legitimate investments, shipping infrastructure, real estate development, community logistics firms. The empire did not collapse, but it shifted its center of gravity. Longtime associates questioned the pivot. Some interpreted it as weakness. Others saw evolution. Roman did not defend himself publicly. He understood that perception takes time to recalibrate. Authority built on fear dissolves quickly. Authority built on integrity rebuilds slowly. Leadership responsibilities were gradually redistributed. Roman formed an oversight board composed of individuals with clean financial records and diverse perspectives, reducing the concentration of power he once guarded fiercely. He no longer insisted on attending every closed-door negotiation. He delegated, but this time with accountability layered into every decision. The estate changed as well. Elena Hayes was no longer introduced. Dia's household staff. Her role became formalized as Noah's primary guardian, with full legal protection and decision-making authority in Roman's absence. The transition was not ceremonial, it was practical. Roman wanted stability for his son that did not depend solely on his own availability. Elena accepted the position without triumph. Her loyalty had never been transactional. She understood that this recognition was less about reward and more about responsibility. Roman did not attempt dramatic apologies. He did not seek public forgiveness. Instead, he adjusted his schedule. Weekly strategy dinners were replaced with evenings at home. Security briefings ended earlier. The nursery lights remained on longer as Roman learned routines he had once overlooked. At first, Noah observed these changes with cautious curiosity. Children sense consistency more than promises. Roman began participating in bedtime rituals, reading quietly even when exhaustion tugged at him. He attended pediatric appointments personally. He learned which foods Noah preferred and which melodies calmed him fastest. The distance between them did not vanish overnight, but it narrowed. Public perception shifted gradually. Business journals noted the restructuring. Community organizations observed increased investment in local initiatives. Roman's name began appearing not only in financial headlines but in philanthropic reports. Some doubted the sincerity. Others acknowledged the consistency of action. Within the estate, tension dissolved into a steadier rhythm. Staff turnover decreased. Conversations carried less anxiety. The culture of silent obedience evolved into one of measured trust. Roman often found himself reflecting on Adriana's final request. She had not asked him to abandon strength. She had asked him to redefine it. For years, he equated softness with exposure. Now he began to see that vulnerability, when chosen rather than imposed, could anchor rather than imposed, could anchor rather than weaken. One evening, months after the confrontation at the warehouse, clouds gathered again over Chicago. Rain returned, not violent, but steady, washing the city in silver reflection. Roman stood near the estate's entrance as the first drops touched the stone driveway. Memories resurfaced uninvited. Elena walking into the storm alone, Noah crawling across marble in silent defiance. The moment power had nearly cost him everything. This time, Roman stepped outside willingly. He held Noah in his arms as rain soaked his tailored jacket. The child looked upward, fascinated by the falling water. There was no fear in his expression, only curiosity. Elena watched from the doorway, her presence steady but no longer necessary as a shield. Roman did not retreat from the rain. He remained there, feeling the weight of water against his shoulders, understanding the symbolism without needing to articulate it. The storm no longer represented exile. It represented cleansing. Noah turned toward him slowly. For a brief moment, Roman wondered whether the child would search for Elena as he once had. Instead, Noah reached up and placed his small hand against his father's cheek. The gesture was simple, unforced, instinctive. Roman felt the quiet shift in his chest. Not pride, not conquest, but connection. He smiled, not for display, but because the moment required no audience. Operations continued. The empire had not vanished, it had transformed. Roman understood that challenges would return, that stability required vigilance, but he also understood that legacy was not defined solely by territory or wealth. It was defined by what endured when power receded. As the rain softened and evening settled over the estate, Roman carried Noah back inside. He paused briefly at the threshold, glancing once more at the driveway where everything had once nearly fractured. He no longer feared storms. He had faced the deeper one within himself. Roman Virelli came to understand that power built his empire, but love saved his bloodline, and in choosing one over the other, he finally secured both.